Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here. This is my first time at Games for Change, even though I've wanted to come to this event for many years, and I just haven't had the opportunity because I was usually somewhere else. So here we go. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about, I was asked to basically come and talk a little bit about my own experience, my own career, because I've had a pretty strange one, to be honest, in the game industry. And we'll kind of dive into that and also how that intersects with my desire to see this industry change and to see our medium change and other factors that you'll see. So let's just kind of dive into it. A lot of people know me for my work in the IGDA. I was the executive director for 5 years. I left about a year ago. And in that time, I had the great privilege of being able to interact with developers all around the world. I mean, thousands of developers from all kinds of different markets. I met with, that was a great event in Morocco a couple years ago. It was just super fun. We held our own leadership forum event. We had a lot of fun with that. Had our scholars program, so I got to meet with a lot of the amazing talent that's coming into the industry. And one of the most fun things I got to do was talk with a lot of government officials around the world. This was actually he used to be the Minister of Telecommunications for Tunisia. And he actually, when he was living in the UK for a while, he was a part owner in a game company. So this guy was very pro games. He had these amazing plans for growing the game industry in Tunisia, and despite a lot of the challenges there in that emerging market. And we tried to tackle a lot of big issues, try and make a lot of changes in this industry. There are a lot of things in this industry that I feel need to change, things around crunch, around diversity, you know, lots of things, issues that would pop up that came up, the things with harassment of employees, just on and on it goes. When I left the IGDA, I actually joined the board of TakeThis.org, which deals with mental health in the game industry, because one of the common issues I heard very frequently in interacting with a lot of developers is the mental stress that they have from whatever it might be, whether it's indie development, whether it's crunch, whatever it might be in the industry that affects them. And I know that's an issue that we also need to address and try and deal with that stigma. It also wasn't fun. It was not a fun time to be executive director and be a very visible woman in the game industry because of this incident that was going on that was called Gamergate. And so yeah, it was a little challenging to be in that position at the time. There were times we got a lot of pushback. I didn't really care because my nature is that when I get pushed on, I push back even harder. But yeah, it was not a fun time to be in that position either, which is why I frequently was seen wearing this t-shirt, you know, just basically don't kill the messenger. But I'm also glad, you know, that I was there at that time because I felt that I at least had the right constitution for that moment in history to lead this organization. You know, so like a lot of us, I asked myself, well, who am I exactly? You know, as we come into the industry, as we go about our work, we can add labels to, a lot of different labels to ourselves. You know, these are just a few of the ones I could call myself. The geek one will become obvious in this presentation. This picture is from speaking in Norway, where it was the day before Halloween a few years ago, and how geeky I am. Not only am I cosplaying as Indiana Jones, but I'm explaining my work on Star Wars: The Old Republic by talking about force lightning. So yeah, trust me, it gets worse. Like when I go to places like Norway, you have to go where they filmed Empire Strikes Back, or you go to Tunisia, you have to go to the Lars homestead, of course, or if you go to Dubrovnik and speak at Reboot, you recreate scenes from Game of Thrones, because why not? So yeah, trust me, it gets even worse. So this was my path into the game industry. To be honest with you, I never aspired to work in this industry. I always loved games, but it was never my desire, conscious, to say, I'm going to work on video games. Because honestly, at my age, back in those days, there were no game schools. There was no like real industry. It was just emerging at the time, and it really wasn't seen as like a massive career path that a lot of people could pursue. So I had a more artistic background. The reason those two things are grayed out, astronaut and conceptual artist on Star Wars, because I didn't do them, but I wanted to do them. So my academic career went through aerospace engineering, into industrial design, and then finally into geography and cartography, because I love culture, I love maps, I love travel, and I could use my artistic skills in cartography, and which is something I love to do. And after I finished my undergraduate work and worked as a cartographer, I decided to pursue graduate school and went to Seattle, where actually under the auspices of Tom Furness, sitting right here in the audience, I did my master's degree in 1991 on AR and VR as applied to cartography, as a way to making maps that are more intuitive and more responsive to human senses. And then I got pulled into Microsoft. I thought it was going to be a 6-year career, or excuse me, a 6-month career as a contract. It actually turned into a 13-year career. And at Microsoft, I created an internal team called Geopolitical Strategy to basically help the company deal with political and cultural issues in all of their content across all of the products. It started with stuff like Word and PowerPoint and all that kind of stuff, clip art in Office, things like that, but then it quickly expanded to Flight Sim. And then once the Xbox project got started and the game studio got cranked up, I ended up working on pretty much every game that Microsoft made on PC and Xbox, all the Age of Empires, the Halos, the Fables, all of that stuff. And it was a great amount of fun, because for me, that's where I really came into the realization that my love of culture, my love of technology, my love of games all found their confluence in that work, which I call culturalization. And so that's what I've been doing as of April this year for 25 years in the game industry. I do culturalization work. I help game developers make sure that they're not making mistakes or putting things in the game that might cause them to have cause offense with a government and get their game banned, cause a group of consumers or gamers to get really upset because they were thrown out of the intended experience by something that offends them or something that disrupts their cultural perspective. And so there's a lot of different things that happens with this. It's a lot deeper than that. I also deal with a lot of strategy issues and whatnot. And so when I left Microsoft, one of the first things I did is I went to Google as a vendor and I created their geopolitical team because they heard what I did at Microsoft. So at Google, I was helping them with all the Google Maps and Google Earth stuff. So I kind of went back to my cartographic roots and was dealing with what we call domain tailoring and helping the company perfect sort of this, how do we represent the geopolitical imagination of governments and what they could supposedly own, what they're sovereign over, the sovereign territory. Like you show the South China Sea, you have to show it as Chinese territory in the Chinese version of Google Maps, and you have to show Kashmir as 100% Indian in the Indian version of Google Maps, and so on and so forth. So in a way, I mean, I was dealing with simulation because, frankly, those are incompatible realities that different governments have about their world. And so I worked on a lot of stuff like that, and I still continue to do cartographic work as well as the game stuff. But then as in my later years, I've gotten more involved with advocacy work because I've been dealing with so many developers for all these years and interacting with them. I saw there were a lot of issues that were affecting developers in a really negative way, and that's what compelled me to take the IGDA job, because I felt at the time that the IGDA was going to be more or less the thing that I could wield to help change this industry for the better, because I really, really care about this industry and about the people in it. And so I did that for 5 years, and then I left, like I said, about a year ago, and now people know me as a raging advocate because I give talks like this in which I talk about rage, which we will talk about. But before I talk about that, I want to give a little PSA about imposter syndrome, because that feeds into this path. So my problem was the matrix, and let me explain. So I was having a problem after I left Microsoft, and I had achieved all this stuff. I'd helped Microsoft, I'd helped Google, I've helped Amazon, I've helped all these companies with these issues, with content issues in games and with other stuff too. And yet I was still super nervous every single time I sent an email to a client. I was super nervous because I thought this is the time they're gonna find out that I don't know anything what I'm talking about. This is the moment I'm gonna be wrong. And this was after like 20 years, and I never made a mistake that I was aware of, and yet I was still super nervous about it. So I love movie scores because I'm a geek, and the Seattle Symphony was showing The Matrix, the entire movie, because there is only one. And Don Davis, the composer of the Matrix movie, he was there to conduct his own music for the Seattle Symphony while you watch the movie. And I love that kind of stuff. So I'm sitting here watching the movie, and I'm thinking about this issue. Why am I so nervous? Why am I so, troubled when I send my email to a client? And then we get to this part in the movie where Morpheus tells Neo, the protagonist, don't think you are, know you are. And when he says that, I just start bawling. I'm sitting there in the symphony hall next to my friend, and she's just like, what is wrong with you? It's not that emotional, but I'll tell you later. And it hit me. It was this massive epiphany after all these years of doing this kind of work and trying to make change happen, is that in a way, this was my problem. I was dealing with this issue of not really understanding that I'm not accepting, I'm not necessarily knowing the reality of what people see in me and my skills, because I have people telling me, you're an expert, you did this, you did that, you did that. And I'm sure all of us have that to a degree as well. It's like, your art is amazing, your code is remarkable, and yet we don't believe it. We just like, no, it's shit, it's terrible, I hate it, I don't like it. We are our own worst critics. We are our own worst enemies when it comes to our career path and it comes to building ourselves up. And so we have to reach a point where we have to actually listen to other people. So even if you struggle to think that you have that expertise or that skill or whatever it might be, you have to accept and know the reality of what others see in you, because ultimately, if they're finding value in your capabilities, you have to just go with it. Okay, kind of that fake it till you make it. Well, there's people around you telling you, you can make it, I can see your work, so just do it. And no, this isn't a commercial for Nike. And just to talk a little bit more about imposter syndrome, typically this is what it looks like, where we think that everyone around us knows far more than we do, when the reality is that really what we know is pretty much on par with what everyone else around us knows. We all have a very unique experience. Even if there's 10 artists in the room, every single artist has a different approach to the art. They have a different technique, they have different ways of thinking about it, because the art and the creative process is built on our own life experience and the path that we've all taken. And yes, that does intentionally look like a Death Star, and that looks like a flower. So think of flower, not Death Star, and the imposter. One thing to think about, I love this quote from Mark Twain: comparison is the death of joy. And in this field, especially in games, with all this amazing creative talent, this is one of the #1 problems I've seen with so many people, is comparing themselves to other people around them and just saying, I will never be that good, I can never do it like that. Well, guess what? If you see someone who has that kind of skill level, you just found a mentor. Go ask them. Say, how do you do it that way? I want to learn from you. And especially, you know, if there's older people around you, because we are fighting ageism in this industry, go ask them. You know, most of the people who have been around a while, like myself and others, we're more than happy to share what we know. Oops, there we go. So what I encourage people to do is embrace your adversity, whatever that issue is. For me, it was going through not only that, there was a lot of other stuff going on in my life at the time, but I embraced it as my crucible. I embraced it as my forge. If you follow Joseph Campbell and The Power of Myth, upon which Star Wars and a lot of other hero mythologies follows the hero's journey, he called it the supreme ordeal, where every heroic figure starts out as like normal and then goes through some supreme ordeal and comes out the other side wearing spandex. So, you know, I like to think of it as embracing your superpowers, because as you'll see, I kind of like the heroic thing. And you have to figure out what those are, because every single person has them. That was another thing that I was able to see in my time as running the IGDA. It's just the remarkable amount of talent everybody has around the world. It doesn't matter how advanced or how beginner they are. It's just everyone had a certain innate talent that I considered to be their superpower, but many of these people just can't see it. They have not necessarily gone through their crucible yet to where that power is tested and comes out on the other side. And what's interesting to me is that so much of the popular media that we consume, especially as geeks, you know, which many of us in the game industry are and in related industries, that we're taught this all the time. It's reinforced with us all the time about the hero's journey, and it's something that we crave and we enjoy. I mean, Game of Thrones, it's in there. You know, I love how in Star Trek they took this character, Captain Picard, who started out being so prim and proper and very British, you know, and then he goes through his ordeal with the Borg and everything and comes out the other side full of rage. It's like, screw the Prime Directive, I'm going to destroy them for what they did. You know, and if you saw Wonder Woman, this is an interesting scene in this movie, and I like it because I've talked to so many people about this scene and how they felt so emotional at this moment when she rises out of the trench to basically stop the conflict that was going on that seemed unstoppable. If you haven't seen the movie, well, too bad. And the partner she's with, he says, we can't save everyone in this war, that's not what we came to do. And I love her response. No, but that's what I'm going to do. And I think one of the reasons why I've talked to so many people, men and women, who have such an emotional response to this is because it's so aspirational for many of us. We wish we could be that person who steps out of the trench and has the courage to step up and actually do something, even if nobody is going to help us, even if no one's going to follow with us. So in my case, when I asked that question again, especially in the later part of my game industry career, who am I? I'm basically just somebody who decided to give a shit. That's it. I mean, let's face it. So, thank you. I'm a geographer. I don't even belong here, okay? I'm not like a real developer, you know? It's just, I just walked backwards into this industry, and I'm very happy that I did because I love the medium. But what was driving me, especially in my later years now, I don't mean later like I'm dying, I just mean, you know, more, I should say recent, is this evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And I really took this to heart. Some people say you have a superhero complex. I don't care. It works for me. I really don't care, because what happened after I went through my own forge and crucible and whatnot, I came out the other side and people were using this word for me. So a lot of my friends they actually were offering to me, saying, "You seem fierce now. What happened to you? Did you get hit in the head? I mean, what is it? And, you know, why are you dressing like this now?" And honestly, it kind of, you know, yeah, I kind of took it to extremes. So, you know, and because there's a big reason for it, because my daughter there on the right is a costume designer, so we cosplay together. So we are actually getting ready for San Diego Comic-Con soon. But one of the reasons I love it so much is not just because I'm a geek and I like these characters, it's also because, like, when I wear my Thor costume that a lot of people know me for, I tell them for that moment, it's the external representation of how I feel about myself. I feel kick-ass. I really feel that way about myself now that I've gone through this issue, and I feel like I've confronted whatever adversity I had, and I feel strong, I do feel fierce, I feel powerful, and I don't mind showing it off. And so one of the things that was really interesting is when I left the IGDA last year, I had some people asking, like, "So what are you going to do now? What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "Well, there's all kinds of things I want to do." I defaulted back to my culturalization consulting. But I had a really good friend and a mentor of mine ask me, he said, I'm challenging you to tell me exactly what you do. Who are you? What do you do? Because I know you do a lot of stuff and you like a lot of things. What do you do? So I took about 2 weeks, because he went on a trip, and he said, "When I get back from the trip, let's talk." So I did. I thought really hard about this, and when I really distilled my entire career down is to this phrase: I'm a cultural change catalyst. That's what I've done for my entire 30-something year professional life. So I've changed the culture within games. That's the culturalization work that I've done, where I actually help the games be respectful of the customers and respectful of the cultures into which they're going to be sold. I also try and change the culture of companies by creating policies like at Google and Microsoft and others, so that they actually account for these geopolitical and cultural issues that can not only undermine their business, but actually can empower the local cultures by showing them that you respect them and you really actually care, that you're not just trying to get money out of them, you actually want them to be part of the experience that you're creating. And in the later years now, it's been trying to actually change the industry, being the game industry. And so that's what I've been trying to do. And basically my history, and I did not realize this early on until more recently, it's like, yeah, basically once I start on something, I get it to a point where I think it looks like change is going to happen, and I kind of hand it off and move to the next thing, because I like to kind of get into it and try and get it off the ground. So just out of curiosity, if you want to see this really quick, like here's an example of culturalization work. This is from Age of Empires, where the original map on the top showed the Yamatos from Japan invading the Choson Empire in Korea, and the Korean government said that never happened. So we had this huge discussion about truth and ethics and everything, and eventually created a patch for Korean players, which is the bottom map that showed Korea invading Japan. And a lot of people said, well, that's not right. We can't do this. We're changing history. Well, you know, Age of Empires necessarily wasn't real history. It was kind of genericized. The Aztecs never had tanks, for example. You know, and plus I had to remind them when I worked on Encarta Encyclopedia a few years earlier, in the French and Italian versions of the encyclopedia, we had different heights for Mont Blanc, because at the time the governments didn't agree on the height of the mountain. So this is kind of along that same vein. Or issues like this in Fallout, where we wanted to change the two-headed Brahmin bull because the Brahmin is a sacred animal in the Hindu faith. And in India, there are laws that actually protect Brahmin bulls from being harmed. Now, it doesn't necessarily extend to virtual Brahmin bulls, but we felt that still it's a cultural offense and we should change it. Well, it wasn't changed because it was very late in the product cycle and they needed to get it out. And they could have done like a really poorly photoshopped job that I did of my two-headed horse. It could have been almost any other animal, and this game would have easily sold in India without a problem, but because of the Brahmin bull, they didn't release it in India. And a lot of Indian players were upset because this was a huge release for that year. It was a major, major release. So that's just a taste of the kind of stuff that I work on. Why do I care about games, though? Of all the other things I could be working on, well, this was my first game. So, you know, I've been around that long, and Pong was my very first gaming experience, and ever since then, I have been a total gamer, and I love games. I love them to death. I admire the people who work in this industry. I have a great admiration for their skill and capabilities. I respect them as well, and also I just have a passion, like all of us do, for this medium. We know that games can change the world. We know it can change education. We know it can change medicine. We know that games have that capability. And so, yes, if you notice the Easter egg, it does spell LARP. So, now, the one thing, though, it's important, though, we want things to change, and I know a lot of people are full of rage. I mean, all you have to do is open your phone and look on any social media platform, and it's just rage. And I've been living in the Netherlands for 6 months doing a consulting project, and I've been outside the rage bubble, because, yeah, people are much more chill there. So I kind of look from afar the rage bubble over in the US, and there's a lot to be ragey about. But to me, rage is not enough. It's not enough to be angry and to be posting angry things. It's what I call righteous rage. So righteous rage, to me, is a reactive emotion of anger in response to mistreatment, insult, or malice. It's a rebuke of injustice, which, again, sounds superhero-ish. Again, I don't care. So a rebuke of injustice. So basically, to me, righteous rage is advocacy. Most advocates are in their work because they want things to change. Most people who run nonprofits or are part of nonprofits are definitely not doing it for the money. As anyone who has anything to do with an NPO knows, you're doing it because you have the passion for change. You have that righteous rage for that environmental issue, the social issue, political issue, whatever it might be. You want to see change happen, and so you're putting yourself in a position to actually make it happen. So let's talk about the industry. So righteous rage and advocacy. So what do you do with it? Well, this industry, the game industry, well, the Latin definition sounds diligent and active. It's a kind of a positive thing, but unfortunately in the game industry, you know, we often have this perception that it's this big black box, this massive machine that's cranking out all these massive titles and then a lot of other indie stuff and all this other things. That perception is changing, but from the public side, this is pretty much what the game industry is. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who enter the industry, this is what the industry is, because like if you're one of those cogs in the machine in a large company and you complain that you're working 16 hours a day, they're just like, well, that's great. Go ahead and quit because we have 25 people who will take your job today. So go for it. And unfortunately, that's a practice that we want to change. You know, I hear a lot of developers all the time complain about the industry. The industry is screwing me over. The industry is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? The industry is not a machine. The industry is everyone here. It's everyone in those companies. It's people. The people are the industry. And I love this company, Nordia, that's out of Serbia, who puts this on the back of their company T-shirts, because I love that they send this message to everyone, everywhere they go, that their #1 game is their people. And we have to remember that when we say raging about the industry. And I know it's easy to talk about that, and it's a convenient term to use. I still use it all the time, but we just need to keep in mind that the industry is us. It's not some massive machine that cannot change direction. So one of the things I often want to encourage people to do, just to give them a little bit of confidence about what we're doing here, is owning our craft, which I think we as an industry, as people in this industry, have not done very well at all. We don't own the public narrative about our craft. We still have a lot of negative perceptions about what we do. So one thing I want to make sure people keep in mind is that in the history of human narrative, We are the latest iteration of defining how people interact with information, how people interact with narrative and story and all of these things. This is us. And this is something to be proud of. I mean, this goes all the way back to cave paintings and everything into distant history. We are carrying that ball, so to speak, of how that narrative and how the art of narrative it gets defined. And so the other thing, too, is the economic force of games, which I think most of us realize this, but I think it's still worth understanding this, is thinking about the economic power of video games compared to all these other art forms that are out there. And now, of course, that the World Cup is going on, how many people have any conception about professional sports? So think about FIFA and NFL and MLB and all these other sports around the world, live action sports. How much do they compare to video games? Well, I'll save you the trouble. That's what it adds up to. That's pretty amazing. Video games are a remarkable force of economics. And so that's something that we also have to keep reminding ourselves, which oftentimes, anytime I've ever had this discussion with somebody in the public, unless they're very well read, but that's 99% of the time, they're just totally shocked by this. They're like, oh my God, wait, games make more than film? Are you crazy? It's like, yeah, well, no, I'm not. But so anyway, who controls that public narrative? It's not us. And you know, the Pew Research Center did this study just a few years ago, and basically, you know, it basically outlines a pretty dismal picture where even despite how many people play games now and how across such a wide demographic, there's still so much misperception going on about who we are and what we do and what games can do. And you know, it really frustrates me that, you know, games, the misperception about they cause violence, they're a waste of time, they cause obesity, all this stuff. And worse, that game developers are lazy people. The worst one is that we're motivated by money because they obviously don't know about game development. So, you know, we can't do real jobs, so we work in games. And these perceptions are still out there. I still meet people who regularly repeat this crap. You know, and I always thought that trade associations were the ones who were going to stand up and basically correct this information. Well, they do. I'm not saying they're bad. I mean, they, like the ESA, for example, the Supreme Court decision in 2011 declared games as being, as basically being a protected First Amendment content. That was a major, major victory, at least in the United States. Doesn't really help the rest of the world. But, I mean, that's a major, major victory. And that was the ESA's victory, and that's fantastic. But a lot of their function as trade associations is to interface between the industry and government. It's not really to necessarily control the public narrative. And I honestly, and they do to some degree of that, but I don't think they do necessarily enough of that. And so I hear from a lot of people, though, when I encourage them that you need to stand up as a game developer, because, like, for one of the things when I talk to a lot of politicians or talk to people in government, they know the trade associations are supposed to talk with them, but what they really want to talk to actual game developers. And I have many, many stories of people who, for example, invited a local city council person to their studio, or invited a local politician or from the state or whatever, and they completely changed their opinion in one visit, 180 degrees from games are bad to when they showed them, oh, this is how games get made, this is who makes them, and kind of stepped them through the whole process, and they're just like, wow, this is amazing. I need to help you guys. Like, yeah, that's what we should do. So a lot of times when I hear game developers complain about the whole public problem, I say, when's the last time you invited anyone, public or government, into your studio and showed them this is how games get made? And it's just a lot of it is just people see games as a black box and they don't really know how they get made. And I hear a lot of people complaining that, well, changing the game industry is difficult or is impossible, whining. I don't want to hear that bullshit, because we all know what happened in Hollywood, a systemic issue that was going on for decades. What happened? In a punctuated moment of history, things have started to change. Have they all changed? No. I mean, there's a long path to go, but the point is that it started with one person who was vocal enough to make a complaint, and then other people joined her in that complaint, and it became this huge snowballing issue. And so again, remember, evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And we have to keep remembering that when we act every single day. And so, I'll just give you an example. A couple weeks ago at E3, I launched my 50 over 50 list, because earlier this year, I was thinking, you know, there's all these 30 under 30 lists in tech and in games, which I think are cool, because I love seeing the up and coming talent. But what about the great talent that's already in our industry? And so I said, I'm going to make a list. So I just did it myself. I put out a call to all my networks of game developers. I said, I want to recommend names to me of people who are over 50 and still working in the game industry, which includes education. And I got a great list of names. I published it at E3 a couple weeks ago, got some great coverage over it. That's me. I just did that myself. And so it's like, I want to make a statement against ageism, and so I'm just going to do something and make it happen. Just like another thing I'm doing right now is trying to start a legal defense fund for the game industry. So what can you do? Well, one thing is you have to focus on your cause over fear. I know one of the things that we have is a lot of us who work in this industry are introverts. I'm an introvert, INTP, but you know, I can fake it. I'm faking right now like I'm an extrovert. And you have to focus on your cause, and the cause is fed by that righteous rage. I want this to change, and that's what's going to help me sustain my focus over the fear I might have of like being public about it. Also, you have to be fierce against that injustice. If you see something wrong, then do something. Yeah, if you see something, say something. But there's truth to that. Also, being fervently supporting each other because you can't do it alone. You really can't, and that's a key part. And of course, acting with collective will is super important. It's very important, especially against issues that we want to change, to act with collective will. And that's what I love about this conference, about the whole theme of being here, is we are basically screaming to the world that games can change. It's Games for Change as a conference, but games can and will change this world in the ways that we design. So just as a little bit of encouragement, I love the words from Mother Teresa here, where she says, if you can't feed 100 people, then feed just one. And my point in bringing that up is that when I mentioned this kind of talk, a lot of people say, this is just too big. There's too much to change. I mean, there's all this stuff going on around us with politics and everything else. But I'm like, you have to, as a creator advocate, as I like to call ourselves, like warrior poet, but creator advocate, you're not trying to change the entire world. If you focus on the largest problem, you will never succeed. Basically, you have to decide to change your small corner of it, whatever you define that small corner to be. And just pick something. It could be something in your place of work. It could be something, in your little region or city or whatever. Just pick something. If you think it needs to change, then just focus on that alone and see if you can make change happen for that. And the point is that as we collectively are all trying to do that on our little corners, we can change things. And I fervently believe that. So you think about pretty much every major historical movement, whether it's religious or political or anything, in all of human history was usually started by one person. One person who stood up and had that courage to step out of the trench or to step forward and say, I'm going to be the one to do this. And so there you go. Thank you.